listening to The Motherhood Experience, a podcast where you are part of the conversation with moms, for moms, and by moms. Let's jump into this episode with me, your host, Val Kleppen. Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. I'm your host, Val. So glad to have you joining me today. Today, I'm joined by my guest, Nicki Truesdell. I met her several years back at the North Dakota Homeschool Convention, where she was a vendor and speaker, and I had no idea when I invited her to be a guest on the podcast the tremendous story she would have to share. Before we get into that, please be sure to follow us over on Instagram at _the Motherhood Experience. You can follow us on our new Facebook page as well as we try to build that back up. It will be linked in the show notes. Leave us a comment or review wherever you stream podcasts, and every time you share the episode and interact with us, it helps us in the algorithm, and I thank you so much for that. Nicki's story is one of incredible resolve, resilience, and is really an inspiration of overcoming. I had no idea what her story was, but it is incredible. If you're watching online, you can see my thoughts leak through my face in the expressions I made as she shared her story. I know you will be inspired, encouraged by it, and I'm so excited for you to listen to this conversation with Nicki Truesdell. And now into the episode. I am so pleased to have my guest, Nicki Truesdell, on the podcast today. Nicki, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well also. It's cold here.
I'm in North Texas and we got our first cold front today and it feels wonderful.
Oh, yes. I suspect that would be a welcome surprise. It's always the first chill of the year takes some getting used to, but then we really fall into it and enjoy it.
I'm very happy. Yes.
I bet. So, Nicki, we start every episode of the Motherhood Experience with ages of kids and stage of motherhood you're in. So why don't you tell my listeners about that for you?
Okay. Well, I have 5 kids and 3 of them are grown. I think if I can get all the ages right, 28, 24, 18. And then at home, I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old still. And I am also a grandmother now. So that's one of those extra stages. I have 2 grandchildren that are 3 and 9 months.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I can't wait to hear about this because for the listeners' sake, I came to know you a few years ago now at one of the North Dakota Homeschool Conventions. I was browsing through the vendor booth, which is my favorite reason for going.
Oh yeah, that's everyone's favorite.
And I came across your booth, and I think you had actually given a talk that year as well, and I attended your talk. And I was just going to buy 1 book at your booth, and you talked me into buying 3, I think it was.
Nice.
So we'll get into that in a little bit, but so you have kids spanning quite the age range.
I do.
Did you always know that you were going to be a mom of many?
Not always. I wanted to be a mom, but as a teenager, I still kind of had this idea in the back of my head that I was going to be a very successful career woman. And so I thought I'd have a couple of kids and have a career. But once I had my first child, that quickly changed. And I just wanted lots of kids and I wanted that to be my career. So,
interesting.
There's such a gap between the oldest and the youngest. So it was kind of, we'll take it as it comes kind of thing.
What career were you pursuing initially?
Nothing in particular. I just wanted to be a businesswoman. That's all I knew. So I went to school and got a business degree. I didn't have any real direction except that I enjoyed certain parts of business and thought maybe I'd own a hotel when I was still a teenager. That was in the back of my mind, but.
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay. So 5 kids over, what's the age difference between the oldest and youngest? Is it
14 years?
14 years.
Mm-hmm.
Are your kids close at all? What's your family dynamic like?
They are, and it's been fun to watch. Because when they're little, there's a lot of fighting and squabbling with siblings, and you just think, oh no. But as they get older, it's really neat to see that relationship change to one of actual friendship. And so one of my daughters is married and she lives out of town, the one with children. And so when she comes to town, all the siblings try to make sure that they're able to gather together and we can have a big family get together so that everybody gets to visit at the same time, and holidays or not. So I really am happy to see that. And I've still got two teenagers at home, and then the 18-year-old still lives at home, but he's very independent, and it's still fun to watch. Now he'll say, hey guys, you want to play a game with me, or you want to watch a movie or something. And so it's definitely a different relationship the older they get, and I'm really enjoying
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Okay,
it.
so I met you at a homeschool convention.
Hmm.
Can you tell me about your homeschool experience and journey?
Sure. So mine started in 1983 when I was 11 years old. My mom and dad had become Christians after a very worldly lifestyle, and I was 11. And they decided, after meeting some homeschoolers in our area, that that was the next thing they were going to do. And so they had a really, really neat couple that mentored them and just, walked them through the steps, because in 1983, homeschoolers were kind of few and far between, but they had this conviction that they didn't want us in the public school system, and this was the way out. And so 1983 is when we started homeschooling, and I went up through the 11th grade. And then at the time that I was ready to be a senior, I had some friends who went to a little private school in our area, and they said, you should come with us and do that. And so I asked my parents, and they let me go to that school. And so that's where I finished my senior year and graduated. And I knew that I would probably homeschool my children, even as a kid. I loved my homeschooling experience. It was definitely very pioneer type days. We had about 5 curriculum options to choose from. We used ACE and Rod and Staff and lots of good books. One of the most important things that my parents did was make good books available to us, and I loved reading, and so I definitely enjoyed that. But it was just such a neat experience, not having too much of an example, to go by. We still kind of learned gradually. You do your schoolwork, you have more free time, you can pursue hobbies and interests, and you don't have to go to school for socialization, all of those things. And we definitely made use of the conventions when they came around each year. That was such a fun thing way back then.
So there were homeschool conventions in the 80s?
Well, there were in Texas. I don't know about the rest of the country, but yeah, we had one in Arlington, Texas that went on for 30 plus years before
Wow.
the original people that were running it finally decided to retire. And so that was so much fun. We would go and make full use of the convention, both days. And my sister and I would volunteer at the convention. And so we got to run around and help the vendors do things. I have so many fond memories of growing up in homeschool conventions. And so that's why I still love them to this day. They certainly make a difference.
Oh, wow. So so you had an inkling then that you were going to homeschool your children.
Yes. Yes.
Did you ever think maybe you wouldn't, though, if you were pursuing a career? And then I know that heart set changed after your first son, but tell me about that.
I did not ever plan to send my kids to public school. And that's the thing. Like, as a teenager, I just thought, yeah, I'm going to be this, but I wasn't really making plans, and I wasn't really thinking it all through. I wanted to go to college, but I didn't have a real plan. And honestly, I think I would be better off without having spent that time there. But as soon as I had my first child, which was a girl, I was like, I'm not going to give this up. I'm not going to let someone else raise her. So I immediately realized that this was my career. This was my calling. And, throughout the years, I have done different kinds of work, whether it's part time or working from home or whatever. But raising my kids was always the primary goal, the primary responsibility. And so that whole career thing, I didn't look back.
Oh, wow. What was it like homeschooling your children over all of the different ages and grade levels and all of that?
A lot of different changes. Even though I had been homeschooled, I still had to figure it out as the mom. I had my mom's example and how we did things, which was very traditional, very textbook kind of homeschooling, at least most of the time. It was a very traditional, structured atmosphere. And when I first went into that with my first daughter, it didn't work out very well. We had a lot of struggle. And within her first 2 years is when I started learning other methods that you didn't have to do it like the public school. I just thought this is how school works. And so I had to learn a lot with her, and she was the guinea pig. But I did learn through trial and error and great counsel and reading books that we could be flexible with our methods and with our schedules. I could let her answer questions verbally because she did not enjoy the physical act of writing. So just so much flexibility had to be built into our schedule, and each time I added another child, I learned something new. I had two girls at first, and so for the first 9 years of my parenting, it was pretty easy. Two very mild mannered girls. And then I had two boys, and that was such a different, oh my goodness, so different from the girls. And so I had to learn all new things, plus how to homeschool big kids while I had babies and toddlers running around. And so, gosh, all kinds of things
Right.
came at me over those years, and one of the most, I think, important things I learned was, especially with that wide of a spread of ages and five kids, that I could have group school. And I learned that from other homeschool bloggers as I was still figuring things out, and how to just have so many subjects combined and let everybody learn together when it didn't depend on like a reading level or a math level. And that really gave us a lot of freedom, and it made it fun. I miss those years when all five of the kids were gathered on the couch and we would learn different things together.
Don't you think we're so far removed from a history not very long ago? If you watch an episode of Little House,
Mm-hmm.
they're in a one-room schoolhouse, so many
Mm-hmm.
different ages, and they're learning about the same subjects, same topics, but for
Mm-hmm.
some reason, at least for me, but I'm going to guess many others, when I started my homeschool journey, I was like, well, this child has to do this and this child has to do
Yeah.
this, and I have to do all separate things all the time, and my
Yeah.
life is chaos.
Yes. Well, it's because what we know now is the public school system, and most people were raised in that. And so that's our mindset. And until you do research other ways, or at least make yourself think outside the box, that's what you do. You copy what you know, which is segregated age groups and subjects, and 12 years of a lot of important things and a whole lot of unimportant things. And so I think that going back before the 1900s is a much better example of how education can work
Yeah,
instead of the way we
agreed.
do it now.
Agreed. Were you and how many siblings do you have?
I have one sister. She's younger than me.
Okay. Okay, same story here. I have one sister who is younger than me. Were
Okay.
you and your sister kind of outcasts when your family started homeschooling? Because that was not a common thing in 1983.
Thankfully, we were not outcasts. We lived in a really small town in Oklahoma when we started and had a really good church community. And in fact, when we started homeschooling, it actually influenced a few other families to try the same thing. And so it kind of worked the other way. We had a
Yeah.
little bit of the peer pressure on other families, and they didn't always stay with the homeschooling model, but many of them did do it for several years. And so it was actually kind of neat that obviously there were people in town that didn't understand it. In fact, that's the very first month of our homeschooling, my parents were arrested for truancy. And so that kind of feels like people are out to get us, they're against us. But honestly, it was that no one knew what homeschooling was, and in their eyes these were just kids who were not being sent to school, which I still don't think it's everybody else's business how someone raises their kids, but that's how homeschooling arrests happened so often back then. But even despite that, like I said, so many people got on board with the idea. Um, and it obviously took time. Every time we went to the store or, anywhere out in public, there were a lot of questions and concerns, but it was
Hmm.
actually pretty good for us.
Oh, wow. And so what about when you made the decision to homeschool your own kids? Was your husband on board? Did he know this was part of the thing? Was your family then with you as a mom, were you on the outside of any circles because of your choice to homeschool?
No, once again, I'm very blessed that it was not ever like that for me. So I have been married twice. I don't know how much of my story you've told, but you've heard. But
I don't
even in
know
my
either.
first, oh, okay, oh yeah, well, so I was married to my first husband, who it was the father of my two daughters, and he understood right up front. Yeah, this is what we're gonna do. No problem with that whatsoever. And different extended family members on his side didn't really like it, but they just didn't know anything about it, and so that was to be understood. Some people just don't
Mm.
understand. My family, obviously, since I'd grown up homeschooled, everybody was cool with it. Everybody knew it, we were used to that. No one was alarmed. And then his family obviously came around very quickly, but it was a very abusive marriage. And I was married to him for 8 years, and I finally ran away and took my daughters, and we moved out while he was gone to work one day. And so that became part of my story, where I learned to homeschool under many different, very difficult circumstances, and it's played a part in writing Anyone Can Homeschool, because you know um, it's not easy to live under abuse day after day after day, and then it's also not easy to run away and start your life over. And
Mm.
I did those things, and I never had any intention of sending my kids to school. So even though we had to start life completely over, I had no job, I had no money. We just took our things and put most of them in storage and went to live at a house my parents were building. It wasn't done yet, but we moved into it anyway. And we just kind of started from scratch there with a lot of prayer and waking up every day and saying, all right, what now? And I had to face that choice, well, should I put my kids in daycare and school and start a job? But I couldn't do that. I just could not upend their lives, because divorce is hard enough. Divorce, moving away from the only home they'd ever known, that was traumatic enough. And I didn't want to also throw in, oh, and hey, you're going to go to school with a bunch of people you've never met before, and I'm not going to be there. And so, because I think it was because I had grown up homeschooled and I knew that no matter what, you could make it work, I did not have any doubts. I just had to figure out how's this going to work? And so my oldest daughter was 6 at the time, and the little one was 2. And so
Wow.
I had the education of at least one to worry about. But then, of course, just feeding and clothing the both of them. And it was a struggle. Single motherhood was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Mm.
I will not lie. I don't think it's empowering. None of that stuff. It
Mm.
was so hard, but I prayed every single day, multiple times a day. Sometimes it was, God, we need some grocery money. Sometimes it was, please help me to comfort these children because they don't understand what's going on. I did figure out different ways, like I said, to work part time or to work from home. Every day was different. Every day was a struggle, but we never stopped our homeschool life because it was more than just about school. It was about family. And, I learned very early on that it's also about discipleship. And so there was a lot more going into raising these girls than just how to read and how to do math. And so that played a big role in where I am right now. But
Wow.
even for them back then, they learned, and hopefully can use that with their children, that it doesn't matter what you go through, you can do this, because
Yeah.
I learned that it's super flexible, and it doesn't take 12 long years of full days, set 5 days a week and all of that. I learned through a lot of years during that abusive marriage, during single motherhood, and even after I remarried, that there's a lot of wasted time. And we cut out a whole bunch of that, and my kids still got an education.
Yeah. Wow, Nicki.
So I don't remember what the original question was.
I don't either, honestly. Oh,
Oh,
I think it was about your husband being on board with
yes.
homeschooling.
Mm-hmm. So
Hey, I
both
love the path
husbands were.
that question took us on. Okay, so now then part 2.
So I did remarry after about 2 years of being single, and still married today. We've been married for 20 years. And my husband, Randy, is the father of my 3 youngest children. And he was already on board with homeschooling too. Since I had already been doing it, he knew that was a given, and he was very supportive of that, and still is to this day. So through that, and his family was very supportive too. By that time, it was a little bit more mainstream, and people knew homeschoolers, and so we were not weird anymore. And I'm very thankful also that this area that we live in has a pretty long history of homeschoolers. And so before I formally even started teaching my daughters, there was already a support group in this area where I
Oh,
live.
wow.
And we just kind of jumped in with that. So no, we've never been, that I can think of, the weird ones. We've just had a great community where everybody gets it, and so it's truly a blessing.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So you've been through it as a mom.
Yes, a little bit.
My goodness. After you left your first husband, did you leave the area altogether? Were you somewhere new and far away?
I was a little further away. I mean, we were kind of in the area where I am now. I moved across the border into Oklahoma again. So it was a little bit out of the way, but it was close enough that I stayed connected with the same church family and the same homeschool group, which a lot of that was kind of intertwined anyway. It was worth the hour drive to stay connected to the people that I knew.
Wow.
And a lot of that is what led me to write my book, Anyone Can Homeschool, that part of the story. But then it continued, because when I remarried, we started out with, while I was single, I bought a store. So that business degree came in a little bit handy. I bought an antique store because my goal was to raise my kids and earn money. And so that way it was a very laid back atmosphere where they could be with me at the store. And unfortunately, it was a very bad time in the economy. And so we didn't keep the store for much more than a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. And during that time is when I remarried. And let's just say money was really, 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 really tight for
Mm,
several years during that time. And so I learned about homeschooling with no money at all. And I do mean no money, not a little bit, but no money.
yeah.
And then with every pregnancy, I've had extended bed rest, which kind of puts a kink in your homeschool schedule, plus migraine headaches. And then we've had multiple moves. And then, of course, when you have babies and school age kids, it's just a little trickier.
Yeah.
And so I learned through so many of those things how to adapt. Just okay, let's figure this out. We got a new problem. Let's attack it and figure out how we're going to still homeschool, because there was never any question that we wouldn't. It never came up like, well, I wonder if we should just try public school this year just to give ourselves a break. That never, ever was an option. And so the only option was, let's figure it out. And so
That
that's what we did.
my mind is a little blown, and for several reasons. I'll try to pick one out in saying
Okay.
a lot of people cannot wrap their minds around homeschooling at all, and they have not been through the
Mm-hmm.
gamut. They have not been
Mm-hmm.
through the things that you were enduring at the time, but your resolve to homeschool is equivalent to their hesitancy to not.
Yes.
What would you say to people who, I mean, you are living proof, obviously, that it can be done
Mm-hmm.
no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you
Mm-hmm.
say to people who are hesitant or just unsure or don't think they could do it?
I try to give a really short version of my story and say, I'm not the only one. It's
Hmm.
not just me. I'm not the first one to do it this way. And the important thing is to know why you're even considering homeschooling, because everybody has a reason, whether their kid has been bullied or they're academically far behind because the school is not keeping up academically, or They've decided that this all of the mess that the world has thrown at us being integrated into the school curriculum is not going to cut it anymore. They want a biblical worldview, or they just want a totally different upbringing for their children. Everybody has a reason for even thinking I might homeschool. And so that reason should be what pushes people. And especially if their kids are anxious, bullied, suicidal, I always say that's all that matters right there. Get your kid out and start all over, start life over. Everything else can be figured out, and I'm living proof. I didn't even tell you the part about my mom being, she dropped out of high school in ninth grade because that's when she had me. And so she never got her high school diploma, and of course didn't go to college. And she understood the conviction of homeschooling enough, and she was mentored by someone that said, oh yes, you can do this. This is not going to be hard for you. And so she said, okay, and so I have my parents' example where they said, all right, yep, this is what we're going to do. And they never looked back either. And so I think that helped that they set that example. But for me, it was knowing that there was no other option. And at that point, then you just say, okay, let's see how this works. And it's the 21st century. There are hundreds of ways to teach your children at home every subject that you want to teach them. It's not
Sure.
hard. It's not expensive if you don't want it to be, and anyone can do it.
Okay. No, because you went from saying your parents became Christians after living a worldly life to finding out your mom had you. She was ninth, 10th grade
She was
age.
14 when she had me. So you can see the transformation from that, and they were both heavy into alcohol and drugs, just very, very worldly. And they were radically saved, and they changed everything. They changed everything about our lifestyle, and I'm so thankful that they did. It wasn't just, okay, now we're going to start going to church. They were all in. They were willing to walk the difficult path, to be sold out to Jesus, and
Praise God.
that was reflected in every single part of their lives, including raising children.
I mean, that just adds even more depth to the title of Anyone Can Homeschool.
Yeah, it starts with my mom and dad. It really does. Because if you can not graduate high school and try to homeschool in the 80s, uh, that says a lot. That tells you how
Wow.
possible it is.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Okay, so I know you went to school for a business degree. You said you always wanted to be kind of a
Mm-hmm.
career businesswoman. You homeschool all of your kids, but
Yeah.
now there's some businesswoman in the mix of that as well. Can you tell me about Knowledge Keepers?
Yes. And really, this came out of my love for history, which stemmed from being homeschooled. Because, like I said, I was able to read a lot. I loved reading way before I was even homeschooled as a kid. I loved reading. And my parents were introduced to, at the homeschool conventions, they were introduced to some good books. And they would buy books and bring them home and let me read them. And so I really fell in love with history as a kid, and that has never gone away. And so I've been reading books all through my life. But when I started to learn about self publishing, it just kind of like my love of history and picking up old books and going, this is so good. Everybody's got to read this. And then learning how to self publish really, it was the perfect mix for me. And so I would, I've always gone to book sales, library sales, and pick up books from, the 1800s and read them. And I think, why are we not reading? Why is this book not popular still? It's full of so much good information. And then I said, I'm going to do this. And so, there's other people that do the same thing, just finding that old stuff that we should still be reading, whether it's someone's diary or a really old autobiography, or perhaps important things like Columbus's journals and the Pilgrim journals and things like that. Um, I just thought that's what I need to do, and it kind of coincided with the 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 popularity of Kindle readers, and everything's online now. And people say, I don't
Mm-hmm.
buy books anymore. I just read everything online. I read Kindle books, or I just look it up on a website, and that all of this was happening at the same time in my head, and people would realize that if you searched for something on the internet, you would get some pretty skewed results. And I'm talking 8 years ago, you could Google something and realize there's more to this story, but Google is deciding how much I'm going to see, or
Hmm.
Wikipedia can get constantly updated. It's not a set in stone website where these are the facts. And I just started seeing the danger in only relying on the internet and only relying on ebooks, because actually ebooks can get updated and changed without your knowledge. And so I just thought, nope, people have got to understand the importance of printed books and having a home library, so that no matter what's going on at your public library or your school or the university, you can have a collection in your home of things that are worth reading, that are worth passing down to your children, and they're worth your kids and grandkids saying, I got to keep this book. This is very important. I mean, Fahrenheit 451 is a fictional tale, but it's also quite realistic when you think about it. And having books is part of the step. The other part is reading them and knowing what's in them, so that you can combat the misinformation that's actually out there today. And so all of that, internet searches, ebooks, finding cool old stuff, and learning about self-publishing really just came together. And that's when I started reprinting old books exactly the way they were written. And I called it Knowledge Keepers Bookstore. And I started that in 2020. I have 20 books in the series now, and they range from Columbus to the Wright brothers at this point. So I've got founding fathers, pilgrims, the Iroquois Indian tribe, pioneers going west, Oregon Trail, cowboys, Civil War, and everything that I pick is a primary source. It's not someone's opinion of what happened, and it's certainly not a modern day opinion. As much as possible, I try to find the stories that were written by someone who was there and wrote it down, what they
Hmm.
saw, what they heard, or their own personal stories. And the only thing I do to those books is add footnotes and photographs wherever possible. And so what you're getting with these books is the real thing, the original version of different events and places and people's lives.
Yeah. As you mentioned Fahrenheit 451, and I was thinking too of is it the Ministry of Truth in
Yeah,
1984?
1984.
Yeah, where they,
Yes,
you know,
that's where we
just,
are.
yeah, they just kind of they'll publish and promote the history that they deem appropriate at the moment.
Right. And the, and
Yeah.
the the reason people don't know that is because we've gone so long in America without having taught the original history, that now there are many people that don't even recognize the falsehood. And that's one of the things that I think was such a blessing for me is, when I talk about my parents getting me good books, they probably because they just fell in with the right crowd. The homeschool community has been working hard to get good materials into the hands of homeschool families for decades. And I've been saying this for years, but we definitely are doing it better than the rest of the world. And so,
Mm.
even as a kid in the 80s, I was reading books that were based on those primary sources. And so, Columbus is a great example. When I would start reading on the internet what people thought of Columbus, I would think, what? Where did they get that? That's not even true. And it kind of shocked me for a while. And I thought, what are they reading or what are they not reading? And it took me a while to kind of figure all that out. But then I thought, okay, it's because they haven't read his journals. Did you know you can buy the journals? They're out there. But what people are reading is someone's interpretation with a few sentences here and there sprinkled in from the journals. But you can read them yourself and get the whole story. And that's what I think is important with anyone in American history. And I do just limit my business to American history because there's so much. I could not possibly take the time for all of world history, so I had to limit it. But that's the thing. I just thought, why doesn't everybody know this stuff? But then I realized, because when school systems choose their materials, they're not necessarily choosing for accuracy. They're choosing based on who's the best salesperson, and which
Mhm.
publishing company got the best contract with their state. And the students are are the ones that are not reaping any benefits from this. And then you have a society that doesn't know the truth from a lie. It's kind of a mess.
So I have to ask you because, and I'm just making assumptions here. So tell me if
Okay.
I'm way off base. But I'm going to assume that because of your passion for history, the information you found, the information that you have republished over the
Mm-hmm.
years, that you have probably gotten in some heated conversations with opposing views.
A
Am I
few,
right in that?
yes. Yes. In fact, this time of year is really hot for that because of Columbus Day. I actually, and I go into it when I share things on social media. I know people hate some of the things I'm saying, or they strongly disagree. Some people are very rude and hateful. Um, I I am used to that. It doesn't bother me because this is what I tell people. If you know you're right, don't worry if people don't agree with you. And it's not an arrogant thing to say. It's just it's confidence and boldness to go, I have studied this topic well enough that I feel very certain that what I'm sharing is the truth. And so it doesn't matter if people agree. And the thing is that a whole lot more people that follow my social media pages are thankful for what I say. But of
Hmm.
course, there are the people that argue. And I actually was sharing about Columbus's journal, and a man commented, indoctrination. And I said, a primary source is indoctrination? I mean, both sides should be happy with a primary source. They can interpret it however they want to, but it's not indoctrination just to read what the guy wrote, unless you have a predetermined bias and you decide, I don't want to know what he wrote. I don't want to hear what he had to say. So, yeah, it's heated. And then of course, just as a homeschooler in general, when I talk about homeschooling, it makes people mad because there's such a mindset that children belong to the state and the community. Like they really believe it takes a village to raise a child, and some people can't even fathom the idea that a loving couple would really truly desire to give their kids a quality education at home and the best upbringing, and give them the most opportunity to be physically healthy and mentally healthy. Like they can't fathom it. And so talking about homeschooling and saying we don't need the state's standards, we don't need the state's money, we got this, it makes people angry too. So but I just realized their worldview is very different from mine, and I just one comment at a time try to influence that.
What about your kids? Do they get uncomfortable because they know that it borders on controversial? Do they also have a passion for this kind of history and learning? How do they play into it?
They don't get uncomfortable. I mean, no one likes conflict, but for the most part, it's online, so they don't have to participate. Most of my kids barely participate in social media, and so we'll talk sometimes about what somebody might have commented on my post, and they just laugh. They're lifetime homeschoolers for one thing, so they totally understand. Not everybody sees it the same way, but they've lived it their whole lives, and they have all said this is the only way to go. They don't want to go to public school. They feel sorry for the kids that do. As far as history, I'd say the ones who are grown appreciate it very much. The ones I'm still teaching, less so, because they still have to have school. But I thankfully I've learned that you plant the seeds and then you wait for the fruit. And sometimes it takes longer than you want, but all three of my grown kids really appreciate history. In fact, I was talking to my 18-year-old the other day, and I said, we miss having you with us for our history lessons. And he said, I miss it too. That was my favorite subject. So I was like, oh, thank you. But it's my favorite. So, of course, whatever is your favorite thing, you're going to pour some passion into it, and your kids are going to recognize it. And every family's different, which is a wonderful thing. So I'm not saying if you don't love history that you got to love it and then you got to be passionate about it. I'm just saying whatever you're great at and passionate about, share that with your kids, because everybody's an individual. And I'm not even sure all of my kids will love history, but at least I've given them the opportunity to, because a lot of them, I mean, they're individuals. They grow up and they become who they are. Um, but what I'm trying to do is give them, because I believe history is such an important subject, I'm trying to make it fun and relevant and something that they'll remember, so that when the day comes that they think, that's an important topic, I need to remember what mom taught me, that I will have given them that foundation. And I definitely try to, because of the culture and the way history is viewed and so skewed and stuff, I do put some emphasis on saying, okay, here's what is trending out there in society right now. This is what people like to say or believe. Here's what the books say. Here's what these actual diaries and documents and all that say, just so because if they're at home, they're not in a university yet. They're not on Twitter arguing with strangers. But I want them to understand that's what's happening out there. And instead of you going out there and being shocked, I just want to prepare you. It's the same with the biblical worldview. They're not having to exercise it as much in the safety of home and going to our homeschool co-op and going to church. But I want them to be ready, because it's going to hit them when they get on Twitter or when they decide to go to college or any job you work in. It's a secular workplace, and they're going to be bombarded with the secular worldview. And it's so much more important that we give them that foundation, even if they don't seem like they're listening or seem like they care. We're planting the seeds, and it's going to come back to them one day, and they'll go, I remember that one time we read that book, And so with all the subjects, it's the same thing. I just want to prepare them, because there will be controversy. If you're living the kind of lifestyle we live, there will be controversy.
Agreed. And it doesn't, I mean, it can be about anything, and it's not just out in the world too, or it's not just out in the world or outside of your home. I mean, my husband and I have very different opinions on things now. It doesn't stir up controversy in the home. I'm just saying our opinions or our views on things are very different. But I mean, it can be inside the own walls of your home, or outside, or in your church, or I mean,
absolutely,
anywhere. So yeah, you can't shy away from it ever, or shelter from it completely ever.
No, I think
that's unhealthy.
You have to prepare and say, this is, here's what you're probably going to run into. And then I definitely encourage my kids just to be comfortable with what you believe and be confident and bold. There's no reason to be embarrassed or apologize for disagreeing with someone. It's okay to do it in a friendly manner and still be bold about what you believe.
Yeah. My husband, actually, what upsets him most isn't that we disagree on things, or we don't have the same view on things. It's that I won't engage him in a full-on debate about it.
That's funny.
he wants to go back and forth, and I'm just over it. So what would you say are some of the more rewarding moments, maybe some traditions you've started or something, in parenting your kids with everything going on?
I think my favorite thing, like I said earlier, was that we combined a lot of our subjects into more of a group or family school atmosphere. That's been really, I think, it made it seem less like school and more like just, hey, we're all doing something fun together. And with that, reading aloud. And so throughout all these years, I've been reading aloud to my kids, whether they were 5 or 17, and so everybody would gather around for the same read aloud. And that's not to say that the big kids weren't reading their own books too, but it was just kind of a, hey, we're all going to do this book together. And the little kids can get what they can out of it, but everybody else is definitely going to enjoy the story. Usually a historical fiction. That's kind of how we did it. And sometimes some movies, field trips, things like that. I tried to make all of our group schooling a family affair and multiple kinds of activities, not just schoolwork. And so those are some of my favorite times. Definitely just the times that we all sat together and did everything. I really miss it because I have two teenagers at home now, and they're they're less into the group schooling. We still do it. In fact, my husband does it with us now, but it's not quite the same as when you have like this whole big family. You've got teenagers that would kind of rather be doing something different. So I miss the craziness of the whole group.
Yeah. I read a book early on in my homeschooling journey. It was called something like What We Wish We Had Known or something. And it was about it was just different essays from, you know, 60 homeschool parents or so,
Wow.
and they combined it into this book. And time and time and time again, the focus from all of these different homeschool parents was read aloud. Sit down and read aloud with your kids. They will learn more than you could teach them in a formal setting. And the way that it strengthens your family is incomparable with anything else.
I agree. I
Yeah.
definitely agree.
So I was super skeptical, even though it repeated time and time and time again in that book. I was like, you know, this book is however many years old. What do they know about today?
Yeah.
No, it's definitely true. Definitely true for
It's
sure.
timeless. Yeah.
That's a great word for it. Yeah, timeless. So, where can people find you, find out more about you, find your books, all of that?
Well, I have a website that is just my name, NickiTruesdell.com, and pretty much everything can be found there. I've been blogging for, since 2009. And so most of it is homeschool related. There's a Homeschool 101 page on that website. So for people that are asking questions, I have a categorized list of blog posts that are, it's easy to navigate. So if you just want to learn more about some aspect of homeschooling, that's there. And then I have my Knowledge Keepers website, which is knowledgekeepersbookstore.com. But you can also find that through my personal website if you forget. And so both of those I've got Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So you can follow me on all of those social media platforms. And all of my books are also on Amazon. So there's plenty of places to find me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you might show up at a homeschool convention where one
Yeah,
of the listeners are. That's how did you get to
I
North Dakota?
they invited me. I was so honored to be invited. I have done a few, and then I've turned down quite a few because right now it's hard. It's hard to travel while I've still got kids at home that I'm homeschooling,
Yeah.
and my husband works full time, and so I have had to kind of scale back my travel. But I love it. I love speaking, and I love traveling to the homeschool conventions, and so I hope in the next few years I'll pick that back up some more. But if you're in Texas or Oklahoma, I usually do stuff around here. So you
Yeah.
can get on my website and see if I've announced anything locally.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so thrilled I reached out to you and you were like,
Me
"Yes, absolutely.
too.
Do
Yeah.
this." And so maybe to close up here, if you could offer encouragement to the moms listening, maybe it's homeschool encouragement, maybe it's something entirely different. What would you say to a mom who's listening and hearing, you know, about all that you've overcome, maybe they're facing struggles, what would you say to encourage them?
Well, I can say that everyone goes through trials. If you feel like you're alone, all I can say is you're not. Everybody struggles with something, and it does sometimes feel overwhelming as a mom or as a homeschooler. And I think it's helpful. I have learned over all these years that you often get to look back on your struggles instead of just never getting out of them. And so realize that the hard times are usually temporary. And if you can spend your time in that learning what God wants to teach you through it instead of wallowing or asking why me, just trust God and stay true to your convictions and keep planting seeds in your kids. I'm in a place right now where I'm still thinking, okay, God, I know you can do your work if I just obey. If I plant the seeds, you do the rest, you know. And sometimes it does take patience and waiting, but um, I don't think there's any reason. And I know this offends some people. There's no reason not to homeschool because you're giving your kids and a completely different upbringing. It's discipleship, it's family, it's just a whole different childhood, and there is very little out there to stop you, including income, work, family circumstances. And if you doubt it, get my book, Anyone Can Homeschool, because I didn't just tell my story. I actually interviewed quite a few other parents going through all kinds of circumstances and asked them, how did you do it? Why did you keep going? And how did that work? So if you're homeschooling, don't give up. If you want to homeschool, take the leap and let all of the veterans around you help you out.
Absolutely, for sure. Nicki, real quick, are you a coffee drinker by chance?
Yes.
Okay.
Iced coffee.
Iced coffee.
Yeah.
Did you know that a coffee seed to grow a coffee plant can take 5 years to germinate?
Wow. I did not know that.
So coffee is like the most enjoyed beverage in the world in all different forms. And to get a coffee bean plant to grow can take up to 5 years. So don't be discouraged in the amount of time it takes for the seed to germinate. Once it's planted, the fruit will follow. So
I'm seeing that now, and I'm still praying on that too. So yeah, that is great to know. That's so helpful.
Yeah, Nicki, thanks again. I've enjoyed having you as a guest.
Me too.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. To join our exclusive TME community, head over to themotherhoodexperience.com/learn more. Be sure to follow the Motherhood Experience on Instagram, and please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment below, and we'll catch you next time.